Tonight, we begin with a question that should not be this hard to answer in the third year of a grinding European war. What does it mean when the Kremlin goes quiet? Because right now, as diplomats circulate draft proposals, as presidents and prime ministers invoke the word peace for their domestic audiences, and as soldiers continue to die every single day along a front line that stretches hundreds of miles, one of the central players in this war, the Russian state, is offering the world ambiguity, no clear yes, no definitive no, just a calibrated strategic silence. According to multiple international outlets and official briefings from Kyiv, a new round of proposals loosely gathered under the label of a peace plan has made its way toward Moscow. It is not the first plan, and it will not be the last, but this one arrives at a particularly dangerous moment. Ukraine is under extraordinary pressure on the battlefield and in its energy grid. Western governments are fighting internal political fatigue, and Russia, though bloodied and sanctioned, is still standing, still producing missiles, still recruiting soldiers, still exporting oil. And yet, when it comes to this peace plan, the Kremlin does not quite say where it stands. Russian officials hint that a response might come soon, but in diplomatic terms, soon can be an hour, a month, or never. So tonight, we are going to pull apart that silence. We are going to investigate why Moscow is hesitating, what leverage it believes this moment offers, and how that uncertainty turns into real consequences for real people on the ground, from the trenches in Donbass to the bomb shelters in Kharkiv, to the conference rooms in Brussels and Washington, where strategy is written and rewritten by the hour. This is not simply a story about whether there will be a peace deal. It is a story about what power looks like when it is losing men but gaining time, when it can't afford to publicly retreat but also isn't ready to fully commit to endless war. It is a story about how, in modern conflicts, silence itself becomes a weapon. Let's start by rewinding the tape. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the Kremlin spoke loudly and constantly. There were speeches about denazification, about historic lands, about protecting Russian speakers. There were televised meetings, choreographed phone calls with world leaders, even performative negotiating sessions in Belarus and Turkey. Moscow wanted the world to see it as a dominant power, in control of events, dictating the conversation. But what happens to that posture when the war that was supposed to last days or weeks turns into a multi-year slog? When the 3-day operation doesn't end, and instead the map of the front line barely moves at all for months? As the war has ground on, Russia's public rhetoric has changed. Fewer grandiose proclamations, more careful, coded language. The Kremlin's official spokespeople have begun to speak in layers, offering hints but not firm positions, especially when it comes to negotiations. That is where we are tonight. According to Ukrainian officials, and echoed by several Western diplomats, Kyiv has been working on what it calls a peace formula, a set of principles it insists are non-negotiable: the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, the withdrawal of Russian troops, accountability for war crimes, and robust security guarantees to ensure that this invasion is not repeated in a decade or two. On paper, it sounds straightforward. A country that has been invaded is asking for its territory back and for the invader to face consequences. But on the other side of that equation in Moscow, those demands are not just unacceptable, they cut directly into the heart of the Kremlin's narrative about this war. Admitting to those terms would mean acknowledging that the entire project of this invasion has failed. Which is why, when these proposals land on desks in Russia's foreign ministry, or are summarized in memos to the presidential administration, the public answer is not yes or no. It is something else. It is this vague promise that Russia will study the plan, that it will respond in due course, that a reply will come soon. So, what is soon? To understand that word in the Moscow context, you have to understand where the war stands right now. The front line across eastern and southern Ukraine is a scar that runs through farmland, devastated towns, and shattered industrial cities. According to battlefield assessments from Western intelligence services, Russia maintains numerical advantages in artillery and manpower in several sectors, but its offensives are costly and slow. Ukraine, for its part, has fewer munitions than it would like, fewer air defenses than it needs, and fewer soldiers than it had at the beginning of this war. But its military remains cohesive, motivated, and tactically more flexible than the invading force. Away from the trenches, this is also a war of infrastructure. Missiles and drones target power plants, substations, and rail lines. According to multiple verified reports, Russia has renewed its campaign against Ukraine's energy system, seeking to plunge cities into darkness and strain the civilian population as winter approaches or deepens. Each strike is a message: time is not neutral, time hurts someone. In that environment, Moscow's delay in responding to peace proposals is not just bureaucratic, it is strategic. Every week, every month that passes without a formal negotiation, Russia can continue to test how much punishment Ukraine can take and how much political will remains in Western capitals. Can Kyiv still count on ammunition shipments? Are European leaders still willing to spend billions shoring up Ukraine's grid and defense? Is Washington still able to keep its own political infighting from spilling over into paralysis on Ukraine policy? According to a number of international news outlets, senior officials in NATO countries privately warn that Russian leadership believes the West's attention span is finite, that democratic societies tire of distant wars faster than authoritarian ones do. If that is the underlying assumption, then silence, the non-committal "we will answer soon," is not neutral at all. It's a waiting game. But there is a second layer to this strategic silence, one that is about domestic politics inside Russia. Publicly, the Kremlin cannot admit weakness. It cannot tell its citizens that after thousands of Russian dead, hundreds of thousands of mobilized men, and a barrage of Western sanctions that have reshaped the country's economy, Moscow is now prepared to trade away any of the occupied territories it has formally declared part of the Russian Federation. These are the regions Kherson, Zaporizhzhia, Luhansk, Donetsk, that President Vladimir Putin has called forever Russian in heavily scripted speeches. Any peace plan that demands a full withdrawal from those regions confronts the Kremlin with an impossible choice. Either reject the plan outright and commit to an indefinite grinding war, or accept the terms and admit to the Russian public that the grand project of territorial expansion has failed. Silence is how you avoid that choice, at least for a while. It allows the Kremlin to send different messages to different audiences. To Western intermediaries, Russian diplomats can imply that they are not rejecting diplomacy, that they are simply taking the plan under consideration, that they are reasonable, that they are open. To domestic hardliners and nationalist voices, they can say, "We have not agreed to anything, we are fighting on, we have not betrayed the cause." In this sense, the ambiguity around Russia's response to the peace plan is not a glitch, it is the feature. But if you zoom out from the negotiation table, from the diplomatic language and the state media spin, you see how costly this ambiguity is at the human level. In a city like Kyiv, just a short drive from the Russian border, residents live with the constant possibility that the next air raid siren will not just be a warning, it will be followed by the sound of impact, the shattering of glass, the roar of a missile tearing into a residential block. Parents put their children to bed not knowing if the power will still be on in the morning, or if a transformer station miles away will have been obliterated overnight. In the Donbass region, soldiers and civilians coexist in a kind of suspended existence, days marked by incoming artillery, supply runs, short bursts of rest. What does peace plan mean to them when there is no visible sign on the horizon that the shelling will stop, when the only noticeable shift is the texture of the mud as the seasons change? For them, for the people on the ground, Moscow's soon is not an abstract diplomatic timeline. It is the difference between another month of bombardment and the possibility, however faint, that the guns might fall silent. And yet no one can promise them that silence.